Welcome back. Happy Thursday, and welcome to the RAD podcast. As we start a new series, I am Larry Jefferson, and I am delighted to share this evening with you and my awesome teammate, even though his hat is very ugly.
Man, look, brother, don't hate on 18, man. Don't hate on 18. Y'all gonna get there though. Y'all gonna get there though. You know what I'm saying? Like, I really feel like after LeBron leaves, you know what I'm saying, y'all will get your championship, bro. That's what's going to happen.
We winning this year.
Hey, well,
This
if it's
year
the
we're
Celtics and
winning.
the Lakers, man, hey, we going to the game then. That's all I gotta say.
Absolutely.
Dantrayl Smith from the great city of Memphis. Glad to be here. Looking forward to tonight. Apologies for the technical difficulties. As always, when we're talking about powerful subjects, it seems like technology always decides to have its own brain, right? So the powers that be were trying to hold us back, but we are here. And delighted to have this conversation. If you did not have an opportunity to check us out last week, make sure you go back to YouTube or a lot of the audio platforms wherever you access podcasts and check out last week's episode as we talked about self-segregation within the Black community. And the two women that we had on the show were dynamic, and I mean dynamic. And just really thankful, bro, to be able to have them come on because they've written a couple books. They like high up on the totem pole in terms of all the accomplishments that they have done, and so just glad to have them. So make sure you all go back and check out that episode. But today
Right.
we talking about some really awesome topic, and the women that we have on the panel today, man, going to share some wonderful wisdom for our listeners. So
Please, Ms. Williams, will you start with your introductions?
Hello, everyone. I'm terrible at technology, but I made it. I can see myself. So just a little background story. I'm originally from the south side of Chicago, born and raised. I joined the Marine Corps, made sergeant, and my first contract did 8 years, 4 years active, 4 years in the reservist. Shortly after that, I became the manager of the American Red Cross here in Houston, Texas. At the age of 23, went on.
H-Town?
Hmm?
H-Town?
Okay, went on to become a detention officer, and then I became a police officer, and I earned my double master's in criminal management, justice administration, and then I went on to earn my doctoral degree in criminal justice and leadership. I am now a behavior clinician for the state for IDD and mental health, as well as a law enforcement chaplain. And I'm in ministry, and that is my spiel.
Okay, appreciate it. You're
Hello.
muted though.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, we made it. Hello, my name is Joelia Estelle Torres. I was born and raised in Paterson, New Jersey. I just spent the last 2 years doing diversity, equity, inclusion-based work in Philadelphia and Center City, Philly. And I'm still engaging in inclusive excellence work, even as I've returned to my alma mater at the College of New Jersey, where I was able to get my bachelor's in English education and my master's in urban secondary education. So I'm jazzed to be here. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Glad you both are here. Hey, so let's jump right into it.
hey, let's do it. So, as many of our listeners know, we have transitioned to talking about the topic around Project 2025. And so, if you have not had an opportunity to go and read the document, it's a long document, but it is extremely eye-opening. I'll use that choice of words that could happen in America. So, we're going to dive in. The first question is, could you all talk a little bit and just in within your own words, right? So, briefly explain what Project 2025 is and really how it will redefine the role of the White House.
I could get us started. So I think in in layman's terms, Project 2025 is really the blueprint for the next presidential administration, the next conservative presidential administration, that really tries centralizing government in the hands of executive power. So really expanding like the president's ability to appoint federal workers, as opposed to, we have a history of nonpartisan career civil servants that have areas of expertise all throughout the executive branch, working within different departments like the Department of Agriculture, and really just trying to hand select people to work in those roles that are really aligned with the political agenda of the next presidential administration. So really trying to expand executive power, circumnavigate Congress in a lot of ways, and really slashing federal funding, federal programs in a way to bolster the private sector. And that's basically my interpretation from skimming the 900 plus page document.
Yep, it's
Right.
long. It's long.
All righty. As a politician, I ran for mayor of the fourth largest city, Houston, Texas. So my understanding, I'm not as brass on the subject. I believe that they're trying to manufacture a certain type of politician, that is extremely under the Confederate rule or Confederate thumb, and they're trying to navigate these very high profile political positions for people they handpick that will ultimately impact communities of color, also impact communities that are already poverty stricken. And so I look at it like a game of chess, that they're playing a game of chess, but it involves people real life. And I'm just waiting to see what happens, because if I don't really like to dabble in hypotheticals, because right now it's a bunch of hypotheticals. We have to see who's going to get into office, regardless. If we know if we go in the Biden administration again, it could be catastrophic. We don't know if it will be catastrophic if we go on the Trump's administration. I think this is indeed a follow-up question.
Right. You bring up a great point. Like it's a fear tactic, right? Like I think it's one of those things where they want to, in my opinion, one, create the spirit of fear, but then I think also to kind of transition our attention to really kind of like, oh, this is gonna happen. So now let's spend all our time and energy, when to take it's a distraction to be able to really kind of take us away from what really needs to happen, which is continued unified fronts of us working together, supporting businesses, supporting elected officials who do have our best interests, and of course going to the polls. But yes, 100% agree with you on that statement. So yeah, Larry, what you got?
So with that being said, and especially with our minority or Black or Hispanic communities, what do you see as the long implications if it is implemented? How does that impact our communities in America?
I believe if it's implemented, it's going to create furthermore segregation. Bill Clinton could be heard stating, yes, they allow, Latino, Hispanic immigrants to come in to ultimately, replace the African American vote. And so the African Americans are now being awakened, right? We're in this woke culture that they're afraid of. And that with that being said, they're also saying, look, America's birth rate is at its lowest it's ever been, its
Mm,
lowest friends. I believe that they're gonna put in the minds of minorities, Black and brown, hey, that the Black community does not like the brown community does not like the Black community. And then we heard a politician say, hey, the Mexicans are stealing the Black people's job. And so people make fun of it, and some were really serious, and started to say racial slurs out loud or in things of that nature, when the bottom line is we're both minorities, Black and brown, we are both impacted by law enforcement, poverty, STIs, heart condition, high blood pressure, health conditions, poor food choices, food deserts in our community. So why are we worrying about if one doesn't like the other, or if someone is going to take your job, when the president of the United States, the previous president of the United States, who said 2 terms and helped fund the federal prison, he made it to where you can buy stock into it.
Mm.
It's saying that, hey, we just needed the Latinos, Hispanics here so they can increase the birth rate. I think that is extremely offensive in that regard.
Yeah, I think that there's been an incredible level of divisiveness. I think that the the way that conservatives have been moving lately and the kind of like ideologies that they're toting and the fear tactics that they're using, the dog whistles, all of that is really just a way to sow division among marginalized communities, and not just Black and brown folk, but also like the queer community, the disabled community, like people who are experiencing homelessness, um, low income folks. I think that they're using all of these like catchy pitches that are going to be making good sound bites that are going to go viral as a way of sowing division. Because if we were to actually like look through the document and read the document, all of these marginalized communities are being decimated by these policies. It's going to exacerbate climate change, which we know is mainly going to impact low-income Black and brown communities. It's going to cut the staff, like cut federal funding for all of these things, like the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, the Department of Health and Human Services. It's really going to. They want to completely do away with the Department of Education,
Education. Yep.
and they want to shunt all of the smaller offices within the Department of Education into all of these other federal agencies that they're already slashing funding for, and that they're already like downsizing and cutting so much staff, as a way to continue to keep us um, feeling disempowered, to continue disenfranchising us. But then they're using all of this rhetoric of, oh, well, this group of people is taking your jobs, or this group of people is threatening your way of life because they have access to freedom, because they're able to marry who they want, because they're able to identify whatever way they want. So using all of these fear mongering tactics to keep us at odds with one another, as opposed to looking at the ruling class, as opposed to looking at all of these groups that aren't experiencing all of these systemic levels of oppression in the way that they have done historically throughout this country, because it's always been keeping the little people at odds with one another, so that way they're not looking at the people at the top that are actually keeping them in this oppressed state.
Absolutely. Appreciate
So
that answer from both of
so
you.
I have a follow-up question to that in regards to um why do you think there is such a fear in us, and I mean trying to create these more systems? It's like I mean, they've always done it, right? Like America's always been built on creating these systems of oppression to kind of keep certain people in and certain people out. But I guess like it just seems like now, or maybe it's because we're just so woke. Like it just seems now it's so multiplicity. Like I'm just like thrown at odds at the reason why. And I have a couple of things. I mean, I feel like because we are the people that make a lot of happen, you know what I'm saying? And so it's this notion of I am going to be my job is going to be threatened, my money is going to be threatened. It's because like I think we have certain people and like certain individuals that look like us, right? That have kind of understand and learn the system game and now are spreading that knowledge to others. And it's like, oh, we got to stop this, right? And so, like you said earlier, it's like a systematic oppression that continues to go. But I'm just wondering, like, where do you think that fear of us comes from?
I think it definitely stemmed from the fact that they know who and what we are, right? Anytime you honestly have hidden what a person really is, and they begin to wake up and know their true identity, is something that is ignited in them that makes them want to push. Minorities have always had to go through every hurdle. It was always roadblocks set up. So now, when poverty is going into the Caucasians community, their children lives are being threatened with school shootings and different things of that nature. I think that fear alone, that minorities are progressing, because by 2030, the majority will be Spanish speaking and of Latino or Hispanic descent. And so that fear alone raises a major concern. And if they can continue to get us to go against each other and fight against each other, we take each other out. We take out leaders. We lose our lives to increase SCI, increase health concerns. We lose our young men, our young ladies to the prison system. I can't tell you how many young adults I've arrested for crimes that carry almost a life sentence, because we're adding
Wow.
head and they're allowing this to go forward. If they can continue to push this narrative that minorities should not band together, or even playing the affirmative action game you had last year, where Asian Americans were like, hey, I can't get into college at the Harvard and Ivy League colleges because of African Americans, because of affirmative action. So they strip away affirmative action. The guy up winning the lawsuit, and then the numbers come out that still Asian Americans
We're not.
were not still able to get into the Harvards and the Ivy League schools. And so now we have the Asian community at odds with us again.
With us. Yep.
With us. And so if they continue to put any type of stereotype, because African American women or women of African descent are leading the United States in the most degrees. And then we also have our Hispanic brothers and sisters, or his Latino brothers and sisters. They're breaking glass ceilings on their own. And so as they continue to break glass ceilings, we're no longer looking to our Caucasian counterparts like, hey, can you give me a seat at the table? We're bringing the table in the chair. We no longer even want to sit at your table,
Right.
because we're capable of doing it on our own. We don't need that a boy pet on our back.
Mm.
Love it.
Wow.
Before I get into my piece, every time that someone talks about affirmative action, I'm like, well, I just find it funny how they did away with affirmative action, but no one raised any question about legacy admissions. But that's neither here nor there, right?
Right.
Oh, I love squeezing that one. I'm like, justify that for me. Like,
Let's go.
I'm legitimately curious.
Yeah.
No, but I think the idea, they told this idea like there's only so many slices of a pie. Like, if other people are able to get equal footing, if other people are able to get rights, and that means that your rights are somehow being stripped away. And I think sometimes when we look back, like someone said this to me when I was moving through my college experience, and it was really something that I took a time to ponder. When you think of like, well, what is the white identity if there is no Black identity? Like, what is the white identity without Blackness? Like, what do you attribute to a white culture? Like, what is it? The idea that so many people in powerful positions, the idea of like these privileged groups that may not have a sense of identity, like that their sense of identity comes from power, that it comes from the
Right.
idea of being the top of this hierarchy. And now that it's equal footing, or like when people are given access to certain rights, or when the playing field is even, it's like, well, what do I have now, when this hierarchy was how I define my sense of self? And I think it's also
Right.
the reason why it's so convenient to be divisive, to sow division, to spout all of this stuff about, well, this is your enemy, these people are diametrically opposed to you, these people are against you, they're against your way of life, they don't think that you should be here, they don't think that you should have access to X, Y, and Z. That, ooh, my entire train of thought just went. That it's so easy to do that, because then where is there a willingness to have conversation to understand each other? Because when we're actually able to level with one another and we have conversation, no, our life experiences aren't going to be homogenous. We're not all going to be the same. But when you have conversation, when you dialogue across difference, it is so easy to find common ground of like, maybe I don't agree with you 100%, or maybe our life experiences don't completely align with one another, but I see you. I see your humanity. I see how at the end of the day, like, we want access to, whatever our new idea of the American dream is. Like, we just want access. We want opportunities. We want a safe world for ourselves and our family and our kids. But when you do all this fear mongering of like, don't even interact with them because they think X, Y, and Z, because that they're the enemy from within, and that they're trying to like dismantle the government, and that they want to take away your rights, and they want everybody to be moving in a similar way, that they're threatening your way of life. When you do all this fear mongering tactics, and that shuts the door on any kind of conversation, and it shuts the door of our ability to be able to reason with one another, to find connection, to find solidarity between our different communities. It's something that it's easier to be divisive, because it then you don't have to worry about what solidarity looks like for the folks that have always been in the position of power.
Yeah, I don't even think they know what they don't even um understand solidarity at all. I think you bring up some great points, both of you all, and it kind of goes back to I forget the politician full name, but for podcast purposes, I won't say his name, but he talked about humans eating animals, right? In a certain state in the Midwest. But when I heard that, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, the fact that you want to spend as much time and energy to talk about something that's so unconnected to the values of what we're really dealing with. And then people want to sit up here and say, like, oh, I'm gonna still go out here and vote for this person, right? Like,
That's the crazy
that's
part.
that just baffles my mind, how you're gonna sit up here and support somebody who clearly doesn't have your best interests, but still we want to. I was like, man, like, yeah, I was, yeah, I was baffled by that. So
And if i
anyway,
if I could, like, that's a tactic that they use because they know that they don't have good policy.
right.
It's like, how easy is it to keep people focused on like these imaginary battles, like these imaginary wars? Like, when you ask, and I think that this is something that is not just conservatives. I think it's something like across the board, because of the way that politics is diluted, and we're getting so much of our information and our news from social media. Like,
Social
if you ask
media.
people across the board, like, about policy, like what policy either side has like passed or enacted, people don't know how to talk about that. And even in the way that like the border crisis has been extended because somebody decided that they wanted to kill a bipartisan bill that was touted by Republicans, because so that way they would have something to campaign on, because they know that they don't have substantive policy. If you look at like conservative policy, it's all about repealing rights. It's all about taking away
Yep.
rights. What are they adding? Like, what are they giving us? What are they adding to
Right.
the American experience, aside from stripping away rights, cutting funding, downsizing government? Like, the only thing that they're giving to people are the people that have always had, tax cuts for billionaires, and deregulating big corporations so that way they could continue to poison the air and the water that we all have access to. It's it's a way of sensationalizing topics that they know are going to rally a base, because if it came down to policy, they wouldn't have a base.
Right. At all. At all. At all. Yeah. Well, you bring up a great point. We talk about where we get our news from, right? We talk about the impacts of social media now versus years ago when social media first came out. Talk a little bit about the role social media plays in shaping public perception, particularly when we're talking about all of these different changes that potentially may be implemented. So, talk a little bit about social media's influence and effect on that.
I believe the media is now actually being looked at through a magnifying lens, because we now know that they only want to put stories out that bring in ratings. You now have news anchors that are doing TikTok dances instead of real journalism. And so they,
They doing TikTok dances?
yeah,
Hold on. The
uh,
news anchor?
news dances. And so there's nothing wrong with TikTok, right? But the fact that our news anchors are, they're getting ratings, they have to say or play a segment that creates an aha moment, or a moment that is truly divisive. And so the media is no longer covering stories that are true and authentic, or even if they covered a original story and doing a follow-up. We don't know what happens next, right? And I think with social media and platforms are like this that are organic, they're able to get the real message out there. They're able to have a platform without saying, hey, CNN, can I be on your show? Fox, can I be on your show? Or my local news, can I be on your show? TikTok does a great job at putting out both sides, whether you're team Kamala, whether you're team Trump. You're going to have enough information to make a authentic decision versus a if you're strictly listening to Fox News or
Yeah.
CNN, because they alter our reality to have us thinking one thing versus the other. And so we do know that media outlets have altered speeches, altered lingo, or just taken sound bites and have exploited them. And I think social media does a good job at debunking them and saying, hey, this is not true. I fact checked it. There was probably a one isolated incident where somebody actually ate a pet, and that person was under psychosis and has a mental health issue. That is
Right.
not nothing that's out of the norm. When you're dealing within mental health, whether you self-harm yourself, you're harming animals, you're serial killers, that's the first step to becoming a serial killer, right? Harming small animals. Why aren't, and the leading race of serial killers are Caucasian males that are 30 years of age? Why aren't we talking about, hey, this started
Mm,
in a certain demographic?
right.
It was, and they deemed that a mental health issue. Why isn't this Haitian immigrant being deemed someone a cry for help that has mental health issues? And so I think we're able to bring up these facts and dissect them and say, well, what about this? What about that? Well, this happened, blah, 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 without them just saying this person is truly guilty. Because if we relied on the media, we'll have a perverted sense of reality.
Mm, wow.
Yeah,
Crazy
no, right.
thing about the eating cat thing, it wasn't even in the same town.
No, it wasn't. And that's my whole point, man. It's like they sit up here and throw these continuous, decisive, like trying to get your attention to focus on the issues that's not real. And it just frustrates me, man, how so many people get caught up in that, right? To where when you're trying to have real conversations with people, it's like they want to talk about what they just saw on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I understand that that's getting that's flashy or whatever, but like let's really get down and talk about the nitty-gritty about what's really affecting us, man, particularly in our local areas. So I mean,
Sorry, Miss Torres, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
No, you're totally fine. Uh, we love the exchange of dialogue because it's dangerous biz. Like they said all of that stuff about Springfield, and then for days after, people were calling in bomb threats to the schools and to federal buildings and disrupting this community to the point where the mayor, the community is asking for them to stop toting these lies because one, they talked about like illegal migrants, like illegal Haitian migrants. All of the Haitians that are in Springfield are legally here with visas to work.
Legally. Yep.
And, like sensationalizing an issue for like a political campaign that's actually like endangering the lives and the welfare of real people. And
Absolutely.
I think that Robin said it best, that like it's focusing on ratings. It's focusing on, okay, well, like what's going to generate the most clicks, like what's going to get us the biggest viewership, even if it's touting lies. Because when we think about in the 2020 election, when Fox News announced that Biden had won a particular state, the stakeholders were all up in arms because it's like, oh, well, you can't say that, even though it's factual, because it's not what the base wants to hear.
Yep.
And that the base of viewership is now like, oh, well, now I don't want to watch Fox because they're partisan, because they were reporting factual news. And not even just like what's going to get people ratings, but thinking about the stakeholders, like how there's all of this stuff happening with oh geez, his last name is escaping me. But the family that inspired the TV show Succession, the Murdochs, that that the folks that own Fox News, and now that there's all this competition for like the news empire, and how the sons or the children of him, most of his children's most of his children want to make it more nonpartisan, because they
Mhm.
want to be more factual, because it goes against like their own beliefs. But the stakeholders don't want that, because they're investing all this money to keep this particular subset of people glued to the screens. And it's like, well, if you try to make this an actual factual news entity, then you're going to lose membership, you're going to lose viewership. And who cares about facts when the money in our pockets is something real and tangible that we could feel. So that's why there's so much focus on ideology and not policy. That's why they focus so much on like spin and grabbing onto these sound bites and taking things out of context,
Context. Yep.
and not contextualizing things, because they know what's going to bring in the income, they know what's going to be bringing in the money, they know what's going to make their stakeholders happy, and they know what their viewers want to see. And I think that social media is powerful. I also think that social media can be quite dangerous, because now
Hmm.
that people are moving away from like cable just as an entity, which means also cable news, that anybody is able to say anything. Like anyone could post anything on social media and it goes viral enough, and people are taking that as fact, and there's
And
no
facts. Yep.
there's there's no internal call to fact check, to look at where the news source is coming from.
Yep.
Is it a truthful news source? Is it partisan? Is it leaning one way or another? And now, whenever people don't see what they want to hear, the way that we're like as a country, the way that we are touting conspiracy theories is so incredibly dangerous, that we're just
And
Very.
every and even I was listening, because I'm a nerd. I listen to the New York Times podcast every morning, and even that I take with a grain of salt, and I'm cross checking stuff, because like how factual are them? Because I've seen very little coverage of Gaza. No tea, no shade. But
Right.
they're speaking with all of these early voters in Georgia, and they're asking people who are voting for Trump, like, who are saying, well, I'm participating in early voting because Dominion voting machines are fraudulent, even though there's been no factual evidence. And Fox News actually lost that lawsuit against Dominion voting machines and had to pay out like a huge settlement. They're like, oh, well, I don't trust Dominion voting machines. And it's like, all right, so what's going to get you to believe the outcome of this election? And they're like, if Trump wins. And it's like, so are you going to question it if Trump wins? No. Are you going to question if the opposite side wins? Yes, because I see how many people are at Trump rallies, and I see how many people, like I talk to so many people that are voting in this kind of way. So I have to take this as fact. And if you're bringing anything that challenges my point of view, well, that's a conspiracy theory. That's fake news. And it's so incredibly dangerous, the way that so many politicians are sowing such seeds of division with the journalistic entity, because then everything is up to scrutiny, and there's no belief in any kind of factual system, regardless of how many articles are out there, regardless of what the data is saying. They could just throw their hands up and be like, oh, well, like that's the shadow government at work. It's so incredibly dangerous, and it lacks such a level of critical thinking that I'm sure you can hear that I get quite riled up about it.
Well, no, I mean, I think you bring up an interesting point. I think we see it across the gamut of any entity of industry, right? When we're talking about, if one person says it, and then if two or three or four say the same thing, then it must be fact, right? Like we have to believe it. And so then we make these policies and all these changes, when really, if they sit up there and took the time to really kind of fact check what really happened, then they would know that this
it's
change,
conformity.
yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's all you're doing is just creating more barriers for the real work that needs to be done, right? So like if we're talking about let's just say higher education, for example, if four people go to the head of the institution and say, well, we found this out or we said this, and then that head person believes it without really kind of going into detail and investigation and trying to understand, then all you're doing is continuing to perpetuate the issue. And that's what I continuously see on so many fronts, you know what I'm saying? Particularly when we talk about within the realm of education. So, yes, 100%. You know, it made me even think about Larry. I was watching this show, man. I don't know if anybody's seen it. It's called Evil. It's on Netflix.
I saw it. I
But
didn't look at it.
man, so it talks about the principalities upon high and the spirits that um orchestrate multiple regions and areas, and not to get too deep into it, but there was an episode where it talked about social media, and it talked about the spirits that linger within the social media complex. And man, when I saw that, bro, I was like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I can't watch YouTube unless it's related to church. You know what I mean? It's one of those type of things.
Hey,
Man. I was like,
I only use my Facebook account for Monopoly Go and and to sell different things. But other than that, I try to stay away from it. But
yeah, it's
we
funny.
got 9 minutes left. Do we want to check with the audience to see if they have any question for our
Yeah,
panelists
yeah.
before? Does anybody have a question?
I do. Well, what I wanted to ask is, well, good evening. But what I wanted to ask is, I know we didn't really get into the depths of 2025, but either of you ladies, just briefly, how does if I can ask that, 2025 impact you? I'm just going to say mentally, since you maybe studied portions of that 900-page document. That's my question.
Question.
I have not impacted by it. I don't know anybody's religion, but for me and my house, we're gonna serve the Lord. So I'm not worried about it. I've served in the military. I've been in police. I've always been in political arenas, right? So I'm not worried about it. I don't live off of fear. God got us. God has my back, and so I could care less. It's just like it reminds me of the Y2K movement when people were buying tons of canned goods and ready to live in a
Water.
because they thought the year 2000 was going to take us completely out. It's exactly the same way. And people were preparing for this. People were going crazy. They were very afraid for 1159 to hit. And so we lived to see multiple years after that. And so I put my faith in God, and we'll see when we get there.
Dr. Williams, you know what's
Thank you.
funny? Before Ms. Torres go,
Yeah.
the fact that everybody was going out to buy water and buy all these things, and the world's supposed to end. Like, what is water going to do for you? Like,
I know. That's what I was
and,
wondering.
and to let you know how funny my dad is, he was like, man, we're going to have a good time this night. We're going to kick it. We're going to have a good time. So I laugh at that. But Ms. Torres, you could answer the question now, too.
The water was to pour it on the circuit board, so that way the robot couldn't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess
That's,
so.
that's
Like,
how we were going to defend ourselves.
Oh,
uh,
no.
no, listen, I'm a deeply spiritual individual, and I will say that I view the document very, very differently. That I think that they're reliant on the fact that people already aren't aware of policy, that they don't think anybody's going to read a 900-page document, but I do think it's very real. I do think that this is the guidebook that they're looking for the next conservative president, regardless of whether or not that president is inaugurated in 2025. But I actually did. My panic made me see through this 900-page document, and
You read all of
it's
it?
real. I'm sorry.
You read all of it?
I didn't read all of it. I skimmed all of it.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
I synthesized.
Yep.
They have bulleted sections, and it's actually organized quite well. Like the English part of me was like, all right. I'm like, I love that there's a table of contents. It's easy to follow. The language is like digestible. So like the English part of me, I was like, I'll give them points here. But the inclusive excellence practitioner was like, oh no, this is this is horrendous. It's literally a guidebook for fascism, and turning this country into an authoritarian government, because it's taking away, and it's all under the guise of like we're doing this for the people, but it's all talk about aligning under the presidential administration. It's talking about singular rule. It's talking about appointing people that are only going to promote the ideologies of the executive president, and giving the president the ability to do away with people. Like they're talking about completely overhauling the Department of Justice, appointing so many positions in the Department of Justice, and weaponizing it for the president. And this is something that we already saw the last conservative president in
Yep.
2016. We
Yep.
already saw him using this platform to do that, but there were roadblocks in place because our three-pronged government works, that they're like, oh well, there's not enough to persecute. But when you have someone that's appointing all of these judges, that's appointing all of these attorneys general, then that's removing those roadblocks. And even just from like a personal standpoint, to answer the question, I love what I do. I love working in higher education. I'm not in it for the loan forgiveness, but I know that a lot of civil servants, if you do 10 years working in like a federally funded position, that you get loan forgiveness. This would
Yep.
They would do away completely with loan forgiveness. They would gut Medicare and Medicaid. Like you wouldn't be able to qualify unless you have like proof of employment. As a woman, like I'm blessed to be in the state of New Jersey, where my right to healthcare, all forms of healthcare, is codified. But they would they're talking about the CDC having a national tracking system for abortions, for
Portion. Yep.
miscarriages, for stillbirths. They don't even talk about miscarriages and stillbirths. I know I've been personally affected by stillbirths. I've had women that I know and love that have miscarried in a way that is heartbreaking. And thinking about the government being so far into their uteruses that like someone that I know and love who wanted to bring a child into this world can miscarry, and now they have to worry about the federal government being on them like, oh, well, actually, it looks like that was an abortion. It doesn't look like that was something that just happened by nature. And miscarriage is something that's so taboo, even though 1 in 4 women can miscarry,
Yep.
that they don't even think about the implications of what these like long stretching policies do. And it seeps into everything, every departmental agency. They're talking about like in all federally funded entities, government agencies, like doing away with any kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion based training. They're talking about doing away with affinity groups, with coalitions. They're talking about impeding our ability to organize. With the weaponization of the DOJ, we just had I'm trying to reduce saying his name, but the conservative presidential candidate talking about that the enemy within, the threat of leftism, is so like permeated in our government, or in our society, that we should be able to weaponize the military against them. So if
Yep.
he could persecute all of his political enemies, and now there's way more since he's been indicted and he has all of these criminal investigations into him, what's stopping him from weaponizing the DOJ against members of his own political party that want to stand up to him? What about weaponizing it against liberal people that are on the opposite aisle? What about peaceful protesters? What about lobbyists and activists? What about all these people, these regular people that are trying to unify, that are trying to make sure that our society remains equitable? That now all of them can be subpoenaed, like their text messages, like the things that they own, like all of that could be up to scrutiny, because we want to decide that we want to turn what was originally founded as a democracy into an authoritarian fascist government where we're treating one person as a king. It's real. It's so jarringly real, and I wish that we weren't one election away from fascism for like this last decade that we've had. But unfortunately, the reality, like we and I don't think that voting saves everything. I don't think that any administration, I don't think
No.
any political person is going to
Right.
save it.
It
We
never.
have to save us. We have
Yep.
to decide what kind of administration
Yes.
we want to mobilize under, which is going to do the least amount of harm, which is going to restrict us the least amount, so we can mobilize, so we can make sure in 4 years, if we want to elect a third party candidate, that we're ready and we're not doing it like 2 months before the election under the guise that like, oh, well, now we're really sticking it to the administration, because it's clear that they've been thinking about this and they have a blueprint for how they want this country to go. We need to rally and we need to meet them where they're telling us they're at, so that way we could save ourselves, so that way we could save one another, and we can engage in solidarity, because that's the only thing that's going to save us. It's not any political party, it's not any politician, it's us, and it's always been us.
Thank you, ladies. I certainly appreciate that.
Thank you.
Wow.
All
Yeah.
right. What you got for us, bro?
All right. Yeah, I'm just now my mind is racing, brother. I got a lot of questions, a lot of things I want to say, but I know we gotta stick to the time. So I got a quick quote for you today, bro. All right. So this quote comes from Pericles, and he states, just because you do not take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you. That's it. That's it.
Yes.
So to the ladies, thank you all both for being on the show. It means the world to Larry and I. Thank you all for answering the call. I know I probably bugged you all a lot, but I thank you all for coming on the show and doing it. And for our listeners, make sure you tune in next week as we continue the conversation around Project 2025. Next week, we're going to talk about the inequity gap, how Project 2025 will widen the divide between the haves and the haves not. So make sure you tune in. You do not want to miss the brother we're bringing on to electrify that conversation.
I better hit the lottery soon, man.
Hey man, as long as you
So
take me
thank
with you,
y'all
bro.
both. Man, I got you. I got you. But thank y'all again, as Dantrayl said. Thank you, guests, for being here, and have a great Thursday. Happy Friday Eve.